that's new. It turned around. There we go. Smooth. That's my motto. Alright, so here's the thing, guys. That wasn't the smoothest walk-in. But I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to do it again. Because, look, this is ridiculous and awesome. And pretending like it's anything other than me trying not to laugh the whole time, it's just not going to work. Okay, today we get to try something that I'm really excited to talk about, really excited to introduce you to, and I don't know how you get your hands on this, but I hope you can. I've heard that they're now getting distribution into the States, and they're in like 16 states, so maybe you're one of them. This was a gift from Jack Stewart, who's a whiskey somm and an instructor in our whiskey somm school. And he had no idea on his timing on this. 3 weeks ago, I was in London. 4 weeks ago. A little while ago, I was in London, partially to be a tourist and partially to help judge the World of Whiskey competition. And they broke us into groups. There's like 150 people in this thing. They broke us into groups of 12, I think it was. And I was down this one corridor with a lot of really incredible, fun people from all over the world, distillers and whiskey industry people, all judging whiskeys from all over the world for the World of Whiskey competitions. And across from me was Annabelle Thomas, who I had never met before. But like right out of the gates, she just sort of had this presence. She sort of like took charge of the room and was one of the strong voices of like guiding and here's what we're doing. And she just had a solid presence and commanded the space. And I was like, that's a really cool woman. I wondered what she does. Afterwards, we're sitting talking. She said, oh, I founded this distillery called Nc'Nean, Scottish distillery on the west coast of Scotland. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I had seen photos of the bottle. I was like, I think I've seen you, because they're doing this like really beautiful bottle, an organic single malt Scotch. And it's young, but they're a new distillery. And she said, yeah, that's me. And I came home, and 3 days later, we have whiskey class, and Jack Stewart shows up with a bottle of Nc'Nean to donate to the school in the vault. And it's like, oh, you have no idea, but you won't believe who I just met. It was the person who found. So I have a connection to this story in that way, that I got to meet Annabelle and I was a fan, but I thought this was really cool. And I haven't ever tried this before. So I have no idea what it tastes like. I'm going to try it, talk about it, and then I'm going to give you the backstory on the distillery because it's really cool. Woo! Okay, first, keep in mind, this is young malt. It's like barely, I mean, the youngest stuff is 3 years because that's legally Scotch is minimum of 3 years. There's some older stuff in it, but they don't disclose it because they aren't allowed to by Scottish whiskey regulations. They can only talk about the youngest thing. So this is a very light and pretty whiskey. But I'm going to add a caveat in here. It's really fruity. It's really sort of like light honeysuckle effervescent, like peaches and cream, maybe like a hint of apricot, but it's very fruit-forward malt. Now, I'll tell you, if you are not accustomed to new make or younger whiskeys, this might throw you a little because it is only 3. And even though it's got a really nice softness and development for a 3-year-old Scotch, it definitely still retains a lot of the characteristics of the new make that went into the barrel. They're all still there. They're all still very present. Now, originally that sort of would have thrown me, but I've spent 6 years distilling, and now I've developed a taste for new make and I really appreciate it, and I kind of like it even. And so now when I get into these young whiskeys, instead of going like, oh, this is so young, oh, I don't know, I just go, oh man, that's a really high quality new make developing into something really nice. And so it is young, but it's very pretty, very well put together. Really excited to see what this turns into over the next, 5+ plus 10 years. Okay, on the palate. Oh man, a lot of honey, a sort of that musty barley note that I always get in barley, which is a sort of like musty grain bin note. That's nice, but not overwhelming. Just so you know, we're a functioning business. If you hear things in the background going on while I'm talking, movement and elevators, that's because we're running a school over here and we have to turn for class and people are doing things on the other side of this door. So, just so you know. There's sort of a nice honey cream. The fruit does show up in the palate, but it comes across more as like a honeysuckle and then a slight musty grain note. It's got a little bit of like sort of spiciness to the palate, and it's 46%. It's a really beautiful young whiskey, but it's young, and you have to be ready for that. If you're not accustomed to that sort of new make young note, it's going to be a problem. I really like it. And I'm really excited to try the other ones as they start coming out. They've done a bunch of other things. Now, let's talk about the distillery. As I'm going to add a little bit of water to this. So, Annabelle Thomas was the founder. She quit a job in London, spent 4 years raising money and putting together a team to start this distillery on the west coast of Scotland. And it's as far west as you can get without being an island. It's actually more west than Oban. And Oban's, the distillery, is like right on the edge of what you would sort of consider the mainland, but that sort of spit of continuing mainland that drops down, they're like within eyeshot of the Tobermory distillery on Isle of Mull, but they're across the water on the actual landed side. So still considered not an island, but for all practical purposes, they're as much an island distillery as Tobermory is. They worked with Dr. Jim Swan, which if you don't know about him, you should Google him. He was one of the more influential whiskey people in Scotland and around the world who would come in and help consult and actually help people build entire distilleries from scratch, from planning stills and production outlay to helping build the bottle and whiskey profiles. He passed away in 2017, but they sort of carried on building on what he had helped them put down the groundwork for. What I really like about these guys, two things. One, their whole team, and they've got a growing team, is made up of a majority of people who've never worked in whiskey production specifically. And I just think that's awesome. All of that fresh blood and fresh ideas. And I think that's a really cool thing. And also, their transparency on what they're doing is unbelievable. I mean, Holyrood in Edinburgh is doing it like this, but there's very few that I've seen in Scotland that are doing this. I mean, this is Compass Box and Plus level of self-disclosure. So when we looked up this, they have a batch code on it, and this one's KS17. And what it said was they filled these casks January through April of 2019, and then there was some older barrels. And they bottled it between January and March 2023. So that puts it at almost 4 years old, but not quite. And the barley is 100% organic Scottish barley, and the yeasts are Anchor and Fermentus. This one you're looking at, had about 11,000 bottles, and so that's a much better chance of that. Some of you guys might actually be able to get this. The breakdown of the barrels that went into this are 2% Oloroso sherry cask, 55% STR cask, which STR stands for Shave Toast Rechar, which is when you take an old barrel and you want to sort of try to put some life back into it. You'll open it up, shave the barrels down, and then char and retoast and recooper this thing back together, sort of like giving it a second life, sort of. It's actually become a lot more common, even in American whiskey. Virginia Distillery is doing STR. They call them cuvee, but that's sort of the same category. And then this is 43% ex-American whiskey barrels. And I think maybe you can get a little bit of the sweetness from the red wine, but it really feels from just blindly walking into it, like the bourbon barrels or the American barrels are holding a lot of the weight in this. There's a lot of the vanillins in here, but I love that about it. So you can find all of those. If you go to the store and buy one of the bottles, you can actually go to the website and drop down a list and click a batch number, and it tells you everything that's in what you're drinking. And I just think that's the coolest thing ever. All right, after a little water, the fruit subsides a little on the nose and it gets a little more barley forward. And then, I don't like what it did to the palate. It actually just sort of flattened the sweetness into a simple sugary sweetness with a little bit of prickly spice at the end, but none of the complexity that it had when it came out of the bottle. So it simplified it, but it didn't improve it. I like it without water better, but it's still a really fun whiskey. And I'm still really glad you're here. Cheers to you.